This week, in our Let's Learn the Bible home lessons with our children, we have what I consider to be one of the saddest stories in the Old Testament. But we can do it. Despite that introduction, we can teach this lesson to our children. We can certainly learn from it. And it's one of those situations where we are learning from someone's mistake. And it was a massive mistake. And as a father, this Bible story absolutely wrecks me. However, there's a glimpse of hope in the idea of uncertainty. And we'll get to that. I'll explain what I mean by that. But we are in Judges chapter 11. This is lesson 26. We are looking at the story of Jephthah. And although, yes, he is mentioned in chapter 12 as well, really we're focusing on chapter 11 here. And so as always, I would encourage you to take the time before you sit down with your child to sit down by yourself without any distractions and read Judges chapter 11 and spend some time thinking about it, understanding it. And I'm hopefully in this video going to help talk you through some of the difficulty of this story, and maybe we can have a better understanding of it. Jephthah is the son of a prostitute. Now, over the years, we as humans have come up with a variety of ways to say son of a prostitute. One of those would be to say son of a gun. If you look at the linguistic history of that, that actually had to do with being the son of a prostitute. And then there's obviously some other ones which I'm not going to say here today. But regardless, it's always been this idea of a lower tier, a lower class. It's not a compliment to call someone that. It is an insult. And it's an insult, and in the family structure, at least in the ancient family structure, it was a degrade. It was you are not true, you are not genuine, you are not the proper son. And that's what we see happening in this story. So chapter 11, it opens up and it says, now Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah, and Gilead's wife also bore him sons. When his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, you shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman. And then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. So, other than me butchering the pronunciation of how you say where he's from and what that makes him, that's our introduction to this guy. So he's the son of a prostitute. His half-brothers see him as a threat because maybe he was born first and then they were born. It kind of reads like that, but it doesn't specify. So, but maybe not. But regardless, they don't want to share their inheritance with this guy. So they drive him out. He takes off. He goes to this other land called Tob. And it says that worthless fellows collected around him. Now, that's the first point that I want us to highlight to our children this week, is we need to be cautious of those who we allow around us, the people that we consider our friends, the people that we spend life with. Quite often this is the case, that people don't spend the time to think about that. They don't consider who it is that they are allowing to influence them. And then those people influence them negatively without them realizing it, and they pull them further and further away from God. I can think of this in my own life. When I was a young teenager, I stopped hanging around with people from the church, and I started hanging out with these different kids from school, and that really ruined my life for almost a year there. It was pretty bad. And it was because the influence from these people who did not regard God as God, their family's culture was one that was very different than mine and very opposed to the ways of the Bible. But I made friends with them and allowed them to influence me negatively. And so the first point we want to highlight to our children is just that. when you're thinking of your friends, you need to make some conscious decisions and choose your friends wisely. Choose friends who love God, who honor God, and who are your brothers and sisters in Christ. And therefore, your friendship is rooted in that. It's not rooted in that you go to the same school or that you play the same sports or that you live on the same street. Those things are weak and shallow. Rather, have a deep friendship, a deep bond, and let your bond be rooted in the unity that you have in Christ. I'll echo that to the adults as well. That should be the foundation of your closest friendships as well. But there's also a point here for the parents that's outside of the teaching, well, not outside of the teaching, but outside of what we're teaching to our children. And that is that we also need to be aware of the friends that our children have. And we should create opportunities to foster the relationships that will most honor God and most bring our children into a higher relationship with fellow Christians and with God. And there will be times where you need to interfere with friendships that your child has made with people who do not honor God and who really will corrupt your child. And you will either need to do that discreetly or abruptly. You'll either need to do it in secrecy, or you'll need to, make it clear to your child you're not hanging out with this kid anymore. And the situation will dictate which one of those methods you need to do. But that's an important thing. The people who we allow around us the most will affect us. Whether we realize it or not, they will affect us. And so we want the people that we're closest to, the people that we're spending the most time with, to be those who share in the foundation of our faith, because that will build up our faith. And if we're spending most of our time with people who are outside of the faith, they will corrupt it. They will pull you away from it, and they will normalize unbiblical cultures, which is not what we want to do. So that's a side point. But the first point that we want to highlight to our children is just that. He allowed, it says, worthless fellows to gather around him. And as we're going to see, that is one of the elements that built the man and the culture of him. And he is not a good guy. He's not someone who does what is right, as we're going to see. So after that, it says, after a time, the Ammonites made war against Israel. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they said to Jephthah, come be our leader, that we may fight against the Ammonites. But Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, did you not hate me and drive me out of my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress? And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, that is why we have turned to you now, that you may come to me now when we are in distress. That you may go with us and fight against the Amorites and be our head over the inhabitants of Gilead. Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, if you bring me home again and fight against the Ammonites, the Lord gives them over to me, then I will be your head. So he makes this deal with them. If I come and I fight for you, and I win, then I'm going to be the leader. I'm going to be the guy in charge. I want that authority. I want that position. And that's a big deal, because he would be able to look at that and, he had this inheritance, and he was drove out of his family, and he doesn't get that. So now he has no inheritance. He has a daughter, and so he wants his family line to be one of power. A natural idea, right? And so he's saying, if we win the war, I'm going to be the guy in charge. And he's basically putting his family in line to have a lineage of authority and power and royalty, in a sense. So he's making this deal. He's bartering for that. As we're going to see, it's not the only time he barters. They agree to that. They agree to these terms. Okay, yeah, as God is our witness, we will do as you say, kind of thing. So then he goes and he fights, and he wins the wars there, and he fights. But there's this break in between there. In verse 29, it says, then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead to Manasseh, and he passed on to Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, and he said, now this is something that he does here, but we see this echoed in maybe your own life, but also in modern films and movies and just culture in general, where people find themselves in a bind. They find themselves in a difficult situation and they respond to it with this plea to God, whether they believe in God or not. It's almost this last ditch effort kind of thing of, oh Lord, if you will just answer, if you will just save me from this situation, then I will. And they make some claim of allegiance. Oh, I'll give this thing up. I'll become a priest. I'll never treat those people like that again, or whatever. And then all of a sudden, their phone rings and they answer the phone and it's someone on the other end saying, hey, your problem's been solved. And they're like, oh, never mind, God, it's been answered. And the audience laughs because it's supposed to be funny that he doesn't recognize that, God orchestrated it, and he kind of just ignores the plea that he just made to God and acts as if it just happened to be resolved at that same time. I don't find the humor in it. I find it disgusting. But anyhow, Jephthah makes a similar plea here. It says, and Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. So he makes this plea to God. Says, if you give us victory, if you allow me to win, and remember, if he wins, it means that his family gets put up into this position of power. Then when I return whatever comes out of my house, whatever it is, I will give to you as a burnt offering. Horrible thing to say. If you don't know, you're probably getting an idea of where this story's going, and I hate it. It bugs me to no end. It's a foolish thing. It's a very foolish thing. First of all, and here's a point to highlight to our children, we don't need to barter with God. In fact, we don't need to try to push God into our will at all. First of all, we can't. He is God. If God is to submit to our will, if we can somehow have authority over God, then he's not God. It's as simple as that. His will be done. We don't need to try and sweeten the deal or bend his wrist or force him into a corner or manipulate him or anything like that. First of all, you can't. And secondly, as Christians, what we should do, what Jephthah should have done is said, your will be done. I will not pursue my own will, but I will pursue your will. The Lord's Prayer, right? May your will be done on earth as in heaven. And so we should make this plea of, Lord, whether it's victory or failure, I want to pursue your will and I trust it. I trust your will. Whether I win or I lose, I trust that you know what you're doing, that you are in control. You work all things out for good. So I will follow you in your ways. That's the point that we need to highlight to our children. Really, the central point of this lesson is that we're learning from his mistake. He carries on. So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites and fought against them. And the Lord gave them into his hand. And he struck them from Or to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 cities as far as Abel Kerminim, with a great blow. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. So he wins. Hey, success. All's good. Everything's well. He's coming home. He's all excited. He's won the war. His family's going to be top tier. He's going to see his great-grandchildren sitting on the throne. It's going to be marvelous. Then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. And as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of great trouble to me, for I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow. What an absolute fool. Like, he probably pictured some chicken or some goat or maybe even a slave or something like that coming out to meet him. Now, these videos are targeted at parents, so there's a good chance that you've had a moment where you've come home from work and you've opened the door and you've heard the chaos that ensues as they hear that door open, and you hear your children somewhere in the house scream, "Daddy's home!" And they drop whatever they're doing, and you hear the crashing of toys as they run to the front door to greet you, and they jump up on you and give you hugs, and it's a wonderful feeling. And here's Jephthah, and his daughter comes out banging the tambourine and doing some cute little dance. Excited to see her dad. Oh, it kills me. And she said to him, "My father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies, onto the Ammonites." So she said to her father, "Let this thing be done for me. Leave me alone 2 months, that I may go up and down in the mountains and weep for my virginity, I and my companions." So he said, "Go," and then he sent her away for 2 months, and she departed, she and her companions, and wept for her virginity on the mountains. And at the end of the 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made. So she had never known a man, and it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughters of Jephthah the Gilead 4 days of the year. So they made this holiday remembering her daughter and this tragedy. Sliver of hope. Might not be as bad as we think it is, but it might be. So there's 2 point of views on this. There's 2 common thoughts that biblical scholars will hold to on this story, and really we do not know. The text is not completely clear. I know it looks very clear. I know that. But it's not when we consider context. So first of all, earlier in the Bible, in the law, there is very clear text that says that God does not accept, enjoy, or approve of in any way human sacrifices. That's not something he's interested in. A lot of the other gods, Baal, that was a common thing where they would with the babies, but God is not like that, and so he might not actually know that. Like, he went off to Tob and he lived among pagan people and these horrible people, and so that would have influenced his culture. Hence him making this plea. But he also was the judge, and there would have been Levite priests around who could have came to him and said, "Hey, you can't do this. You can't actually do that. God will not accept that. Here's an alternative." So that could have happened. There's also there's that. So he might have killed his daughter as a burnt offering to the Lord. He might have done that. As I said, he spent a portion of his life being influenced by pagan people, and was not, well versed in the ways of Israel, in a way. So there's that. But there's the other thought, the other scholarly thought, is that perhaps instead of that, what would have happened is that his daughter would have went to live in the temple as a servant of the temple all of her years. She was never to be married, never to know a man, and that was the gift. I'm giving my daughter to your temple, Lord, that she'll be a servant to you. And therefore, his lineage, his family line stops with him. It doesn't carry on because she's not going to reproduce anyone. And so that family status that he was all excited for doesn't really go anywhere. There's that thought. That is almost hinted at with the text, the fact that she's going with her friends into the mountains and they had this holiday around it, or this time of remembrance around it, of mourning her virginity. Not her death, but the fact that she never got to know a man, that she never got to reproduce, that she never got to continue that line. There's that. So it could be one or the other. Really, it's not definite. It's not solid one or the other. It could be, right? We're not sure. So there's a bit of hope there. Maybe this guy didn't kill his daughter in this way. I'm not settled on this. I'm not quite sure where I would land. So in teaching your children, you can make that point whichever way you want, or you can present both options. But either way, I would highlight the fact, if you're going to include this detail, right? Like, I know based on your child's age and maturity, might be something you leave out, and that's fine for now. But whenever you do have to cross this bridge, one of the things to emphasize, and one of the things for us to emphasize in our understanding of the story, is that this is not something God wanted. This is not something that God wanted Jephthah to do. He does not approve of or accept human sacrifices. It's just simply, it's clear in the Bible. That's not okay. And so it is not an endorsement of that by any means. So the main points that we want to highlight to our children. First of all, be cautious of who you are interacting with, who you're allowing to influence you, who you're calling your friends. As parents, we need to create opportunities for our children to have relationships that build up their faith, not tear them down. Secondly, we do not need to barter with God. What we need to do is trust God, that He knows best, that His will is supreme, and that we can follow Him regardless of how it's going to affect us, regardless of that outcome, that God is good and He works all things for His purposes. And that there will be times where you will have a difficult situation and you will look at the outcome, what looks like the outcome, and you'll say, Lord, how could you do this to me? Pause, realize that the story's not over, take a step back, and often in retrospect, we can actually look and see what God was doing and how He orchestrated things. So there's that. And that we need to be careful with the things that we say to God. We need to be careful with the vows that we make. To not make these foolish vows, but just trust God. Lord, I will do as you say. Whether you want me to win this thing or lose this thing, I trust that you know best, as He did. That's our lesson for this week. It's a heavy story. So as I said in the book, if you have any questions, if you have any follow-up, if you have anything you want, just feel free to contact me and we can go after that. There's also the point, and I made this here in the book, that we need to choose leaders cautiously. They went to him because he was this violent man who they knew could get the job done. But he was basically also a pagan man. And we need to be careful of those that we put in authority over us, especially spiritual authority. And that's why the Bible has very clear outlines for those in spiritual authority, pastors and board members and whatnot, and teachers, that not just anyone can fill that role. And that you, as the spiritual leader of your home, fathers, that you are being a quality person, that you are being a person who honors God in what you do, so that you can lead your children well. Just with the past ones, there's a coloring picture of Jephthah, and they're obviously going with the first outcome because there's a knife in his hand and he's looking very sad, and there's a fire burning behind him. At any rate, that's the lesson for this week. We have one more lesson in this book, and then we're probably going to have to take a little break for a bit, and then we're going to move on to book number 2, looking at the stories of Jesus. We're still on the same Bible verse for our memory verse, John 1:1-3. That's in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Memory verse. There's more to it. We went over that this last week with your children in Sunday school, and we talked about the Trinity, and we talked about the nature of God, and I taught them what theology was, and that they're little theologians. And so take a time to reflect on that with your kid this week and talk to them about that. Let's teach our children theology that they can grow into, not that they will grow out of. As always, I hope you have a great week, and I truly, deeply do hope that you honor God in all that you do, and that you trust Him, even when it seems like His plan doesn't go how you want it to go, that you still trust Him. Have a great week. Thank you.